Welcome back to Primary Source China Investment. This week, Pengwo and I are here, and we're talking more about trade, but between China, Japan, and specifically Korea for show S6. And it's not just us talking about trade. This past week, China, Japan, and Korea met for the first time in half a decade to talk about trade. And while there were plenty of assurances and talks of opportunity, there was very little tangible deliverables. The Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, wanted to lift the ban on Japanese seafood going into China. Yeah, that didn't happen. He also stressed the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan strait. And then immediately after that, Li Qiang simply called the issue a red line issue, implying that it shouldn't be talked about. So, yeah, not a lot of deliverables. But the elephant that was not in the room was obviously the U.S. And Premier Li took a few swipes at Washington's attempts to implement Asian trade blocks that exclude China. He also said that turning, political games and security into trade is not a good path. And anybody who follows this channel knows that that's been happening a lot, linking this sort of trade and politics. But there's no short-term hope that we're going back to where we were. And in actuality, that's not a bad thing. We've been talking week after week after week that trade continues to evolve. Trade is probably going to return to growth in 2024. But who's buying and who's selling is really changing quickly. And this week, we're looking closely at Korea.
Generally speaking, it's really big for the China, Japan, and South Korea. The overall, those trade probably the total volume take the 20% of the global trade.
Yeah.
So that is a really big number. And the high level, this is a very complicated relationship between those three countries. So, and historically, that is a war. And recently, Japan and South Korea are the U.S. partner. So their economy rely on the China market. Security based on the U.S. provided local security promise. And that's become very difficult to reach the trade goal as well as security goal at the same time. And also it affects the relationship between China and the United States. So those relationships is almost affect all the countries in the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. You can't really talk about one without the other, and everybody has their own interests. So let's look at Korea. So in 2019, China was South Korea's top export destination for 8 of its top 15 export items. 5 years later, China is now the top destination for only 2 of those top exports: semiconductors and petrochemicals. During the same time, the United States, which was the leading export market for 5 of Korea's top export items in 2019, has now increased to 8. So some of the substitution effects. Australia has become the largest market for Korean refiners of petroleum. Vietnam overtook China as Korea's largest display export, as Korean manufacturers heavily invested in facilities in Vietnam. The US has become the top market for lithium secondary batteries and computers. 5 years ago, the US was Korea's largest export market in 5 categories. Remember, automobiles, auto parts, wireless communication, and home appliances and biohealth. This list has now grown to include general machinery, secondary batteries, computers, and steel. Exports to the US have surged after South Korean companies built factories in the US, and demand for SSDs in data centers has also decreased. And here's the headline after all those numbers. Korea's exports to the US are going to eclipse Korea's exports to China in 2024. About 20% to the US, 20% of all of Korea's exports will go to the US, and about 18.5% will go to China. Interestingly, China imports about the same amount from Korea as they do from the US. So there are big stakes here. And before we get into the whys, I give it to Pengwo if there's any comments on that.
Generally speaking, Japanese and Koreans. They are major industry like the semiconductor and the auto industry. They have face the strong competition from the China partners. But in this area, they still have a lot of the cooperation opportunities, especially in the critical period for the new clean energy industry. It could be like the redo or like a lot of the new technology. So they have much more potential to get a cooperate rather than just purely competed. Another one is for the service area. China with Japan and Korea, they get increased. So that's probably from the 48 billion to the 63.8 billion. So those areas has less competition and could have a more cooperation opportunities.
You're getting into the exact reasons why this trade is morphing, and it's important because there's really two, and you mentioned one of them very clearly. The decline in China's dominance as Korea's top export destination is due to the increased self-sufficiency of Chinese industries. Chinese industries have become more competitive. That has weakened the competitiveness of Korean products in China. The second is US government initiatives to attract manufacturing industries through the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act have expanded Korea's export market to the US. The global supply chain is linked with that, right? The US and China are clearly having a trade war, and that's affecting the derivative parties, which Korea is a part of. And Korea wants to diversify away from China as well, and they're moving to Southeast Asia. So there's real reasons why trade continues to morph. And the only point I'll make is the same one we've been making week after week after week. Trade continues to evolve. Who trades with whom, where trade goes, but it doesn't stop. This year, 2024, global trade is going to increase at a positive rate.
That's exactly right. Trade really for each country's true benefits. So that's a lot of the political security, regional conflicts. All of them won't stop the trade as long as they find this benefit for both countries. And also, I think the summit between those two countries a few days ago is really try to find some solutions. We will see if that really works.
Yeah, we're definitely going to watch. So we're going to leave it there with show S6. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.